What's up, everybody? Sam Smites here. Today I want to go over how to use the piano roll in Ableton Live 12. There are some new features in this update of Ableton Live that did not exist in previous versions of Ableton Live. And so in this video, I want to give you a basic overview of how to use the piano roll in case you are a beginner and you need an update on how to just get started with using the piano roll, and also go over the new features if you have used Ableton Live in the past, but want to know how to use some of the new features in this piano roll that did not exist in previous versions, but will help you create and generate new ideas. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is insert a MIDI clip. So I right-clicked and hit that insert MIDI clip. You could also do that shortcut it showed you on the right-hand side. I have this info box open. It's going to give you some tips as to what I hover over. So you can see it's giving me some tips right now for some shortcuts. This is the piano roll. When it is open, to close it, you hit this little square. You hit this triangle down here. It open and closes. I want it open now because we're going to be talking about the piano roll. You can see that it has this highlight, which is purple, and it is highlighting the scale. And if I uncheck that, then it won't highlight the scale. If I check it, it will highlight the scale. That is going to be the scale that you determine, which is going to be the whole session. And you can do that by going up to your session at the top and turning the scale on and off by clicking this purple button here. If I want to change the scale, I'm going to do a C minor. Let's do that scale. It will change the scale in my clip editor as well. So you can see it says C minor for my scale in my clip editor. If I change it down here, you can see that it will change for the whole session as well. I'm going to stick with C minor, and I do want the scale highlighted because that'll be easier just as I'm inserting notes. So I will keep this scale highlighted, and you have these options to be able to just see the notes that are in the scale, and it folds it. It takes away the notes that are not in the scale. If I click that, so if I just go like this, all these notes are going to be in the scale. You also have this fold option, which if I hit this note or put this note here, these are not in the scale. But if I hit fold, now it's going to fold the notes in my piano roll to only be able to see the notes that are that I have in the melody, or just like the MIDI notes. So I'm going to delete that. Don't need that. I'm not going to be folding this. And those are just ways that you can clean up your view a bit as you're working through your song or your session. So to put a note in, all I'm doing is I'm double clicking, and then it is putting in a note, and the note is going to be the size of my grid. So if you just right click on the piano roll, then it has some options for changing your grid. You can have adaptive grid. If I put narrow, then as I zoom in, and to zoom in, you have this magnifying glass. Put that at the top, then the grid changes. So as I zoom in, then the grid size changes. As I zoom out, it changes again. I can do this vertically as well. It's not going to change vertically because you have a set amount of notes, but the grid size will change horizontally. I could have a fixed grid, so if I do 1/8, then if I change the zoom, the grid isn't going to change. So this is 1/8. And if I double click, then it's going to put in a note that is 1/8. You can also do this thing called draw mode, which if I hit B on my keyboard, then I get this pencil tool. And if I just go up here, do the scale, now if I just click in, it's going to draw in these notes. I can also just hold this down, and then it's going to place in some notes. I'm just holding the my left clicker on my mouse, whatever you call that. So I'm just clicking, dragging across. You can use this draw mode. I don't really use the draw mode that much. And to delete the notes, all I'm doing is I'm just clicking, dragging, selecting, hitting delete. That's how I'm deleting the notes. You can also just deactivate the notes. Like if you want to come back to them later, select all the notes, and you can do 0 on your keyboard, and that deactivates the notes. I can select this one, activate it again, like that, or I can just delete it if I don't want it. So let's go ahead and put in a note. To make the note longer, then I just hover my cursor over the edge of the note, and I can extend it out. And because I have these grid lines, it's going to match to the grid lines. I can do the same thing with the left-hand side, like this. I can drag it, slowly drag it, and it won't adhere to the grid lines like that. But if I do want it to always adhere to the grid lines, then I start dragging it and I'll hold down Option, and then it will always stick to the grid lines. If I just want to freely move it, if I have the grid turned on, then I'm going to hit Command, and you can see it has those dashed lines now. And now I can just freely resize this note. If I do just want to turn off the grid, then I can just turn the fixed grid off, and then I can just drag this freely. And then if I hit Command, the opposite happens. It turns the grid back on. So I'm dragging, and I have Command selected, and it turns the grid back on. I do want the grid on. I'm going to turn it back on to, let's say, 1/8. If I double click on here, it's going to remove that note. Now I'm clicking in, placing these notes. If I do want to hear the notes that I'm playing, then I can hit this little button here. And now it lets me preview the notes as I'm placing them into my piano roll. So let me turn that off. I don't want that on right now. Let me make a long note. And let's say I want to split this note up. I have the grid turned on 1/8. If I hit Command and E, then it is going to create these divisions according to the grid. So it's going to chop this into 4 different pieces like that. That is a new feature in Ableton Live that I don't think existed before in Ableton Live 11. This is a new feature in Ableton Live 12. Let's go ahead and undo that. If I want to just cut it wherever I want, then I can just hold down E and then just chop it wherever I want it to chop. However, it's not quantized in any way. If I do want it to be quantized, I can hold down E, and then I can hold down Command, and then it's going to lock it to the grid like that. And then I can make the chops like that. And then I can go 16th, make some chops like that. And that is a new feature of Ableton Live 12. So let's say I have this note, and then I have this note, and I select the time. So I just click and drag anywhere on my piano roll. I'm creating like a time selection. I have these MIDI stretch markers. I can change the MIDI so I can stretch the MIDI. I'm just moving it forward like that, stretching it that way, or I can do this one, stretch it this way. So if I had a pattern that was like this, let's see, it was like this, and I select this whole length of time, so let's go ahead and select that. I could go ahead and shorten it like this, make it double time. And then I could also select all the notes, and I can duplicate all the notes by doing Command and D, and I just duplicated them like that. By doing Command and D. I can also just copy them over. To copy notes, you just hold down Option, and then you can just drag them all over. Also, if I just select a note, if I go on my keyboard, I hit the up and down, I can move this up and down. I can move it left and right by hitting the left and right. If I hold down Shift, then it will shift it up and down an octave. So I can shift the whole thing down an octave or up an octave like that by hitting Shift and the up and down arrows. And I just did Shift and hit the right arrow, and now you can see it is extending the notes. So this is how I can shorten all the notes as well, by hitting the left and right arrows. Now you can see in my MIDI clip, I have that C there. Let's go ahead and just create a pattern. Let's go C, D, F, A, or something like that. Not a great melody, but if I go to the left-hand side here, then you can see if I have the loop turned on. So if I drag out this MIDI clip, it's just going to loop it. There is that little black indentation there, means it is a loop. So you have some options. I could duplicate this pattern and double my loop. So now I have double the size, and it's not going to loop until right there. So I just doubled that loop. I could also change the starting point of the loop by dragging this top slider. So if I want it to start here for some reason, then I can start the loop there, and you can see it's shifting. This loop up here, up at the top in the MIDI clip, is shifting. So I'm just shifting the starting point of the loop. And you can do the same thing with the end. You can shift the end point of the loop. So you can see how I'm shifting it in that MIDI clip there. Let's talk about some of the view options. If I am zoomed in like this, if I hit W on my keyboard, then it is going to zoom out according to the width of my clip. If I am zoomed in like this and I hit H, it is going to zoom out according to the height of my track. So like vertically, it's going to zoom out. I could also just double click at the top here, and it's going to zoom to fit the view. And you can also just right click and do those shortcuts. Let's do this zoom to fit like that. Let's go to the top here. And this is changed from Ableton Live 11 to Ableton Live 10. The envelopes is up here. It used to be on the left-hand side. And then this MPE is going to be your MIDI polyphonic expression. So I think this is for if you have a controller that is able to do this. And so I don't have a controller that really does this, so I'm just going to skip this part and let's just go into the envelopes. This is where you can add in the automation for your envelopes. If you go down here, you can see it is MIDI control and then pitch bend. This is usually where you can add in pitch bends. So I'm just going to click and drag. I'm not going to focus too much on how to do automation because that is a whole separate lesson. But here I just automated a pitch bend like that. And this is where you'll find the envelopes for pitch bend and all these other parameters that you can add automation to in your envelopes. So that section is up here for the top, up at the top instead of on the left-hand side. And also there is now this, which is going to be your grid size. You can go over here and change the grid. So I could even do like triplet grid and it'll change it to triplet. I just want 1/8. There's also this shortcut where you can narrow the grid, widen the grid, or do triplet grid, which is what I did. So let's turn that off by just hitting command. So if I just hit command, you can see I'm changing it to be smaller and then bigger like that. So let's say I have a chord like this. I have these notes are kind of offset, but I want to quantize them. Then to quantize, I'm going to select all the notes, and you can either do what I'm doing, I'm just dragging and selecting, or you can do Command and A, it's going to select everything. So I'm going to select these notes and I'm going to do Command and U, and that's going to quantize my notes. To see the quantize settings, you hit Shift, Command, and U, and then it's going to open up this transform here, which is going to give us our quantize options, and you can have it be quantized to the current grid or to a fourth, eighth, etc., triplets, and then you can choose the amount of quantization there. Now, if I hit command and I hover over each of the notes, you can see I have the velocity amounts. If I hover over the note, if you see at the bottom as well, you can see it says velocity and probability at the very bottom there in the little info, this menu, the status bar. So I'm going to adjust this. I'm going to take this one down and maybe take this one down as well. And you can see that the color is changing. If I go to this bar down here, this is going to be my velocity section where you can see all the velocities of the notes. I can also just drag these up and down to change the velocities. If I select all of them, I could also randomize the velocities by dragging this slider up and down. Or I could just hit this randomize button and then it will randomly change the velocities. There's also this deviation where I can change the deviation amounts of the randomization like that. Let's just take that off. And there's also this ramp option. So let me go ahead and remove that. Let's go ahead and create a really long note like this. Raise up that velocity and I will split it by hitting Command and E. Let's look at my velocity again. And what I'm going to do is change the ramp. So I'm taking the ramp down, which means the starting velocity is going to be 13 and then the ending velocity is going to be 127. I could do the opposite, 127, take this one down, and you can see the velocities ramp down like that. I could also do the draw mode. I can just go in here and play around with my draw pencil and change the velocities like that. See, I'm just changing the velocities. If I hit Option and drag across, you have this dashed line, and I can drag them to be ramped up like that, and it's going to change the velocities to ramp up. Actually, let's fix that first one there. I could do the opposite, ramp it down like that. It's going to ramp it down. I don't know why it should hit this one here. I just want them all to be the same velocity though, so I'm going to hit my draw tool. I'm going to hold down Option and Shift, and I'm going to create a straight line across. And now all the velocities, actually that's what I got to do. I selected the notes, select them all, hit Shift and Option with my draw tool, and now they're all going to be the same velocity. Except it doesn't like changing that first one. There we go. There. Now they're all the same velocity. There's also down here, you have velocity and chance. And chances, like if you are maybe doing some kind of live performance, you can, as you're playing this clip, you could change the probability by which the note occurs. So if I take the probability that, or the chance that a note occurs and take it to 0, it's never going to occur when I play the clip. So if I loop this, you can see that the note turns off, but if I put it to like 70%, see, it didn't happen, but then it happens that time I play it. So it'll like randomly trigger the note depending on the chance amount. So 100% it's always going to trigger the note. I'm not sure when that would be useful, but it's there maybe for like live performance type stuff where you're trying to create like random sounds. You have some randomized options too, so let's go in and just select all the notes, select them, and then I can randomly change the chances. I can hit randomize like that and change all the chances that I want these notes to occur. Now this is something cool that existed in Ableton Live 11, but I just want to point out in Ableton Live 12 as well. Let's say I have this chord on this track and I have another MIDI track that is, maybe this is an octave lower. So let's make that an octave lower and make it a different color. If I select both of these tracks, now it says 2 clips are selected. In my piano roll, both of the MIDI tracks will be in view. So now I can easily see what is happening in both of these MIDI tracks, and then I can change the MIDI on both of these MIDI tracks. If you don't accidentally want to change the MIDI that is on a separate track, like you only want to change the MIDI on one of your tracks, you can hit this focus and it will gray out one of the MIDI tracks. So I can click on this, but I won't be able to change it from this top track. And to change the focus, go back to your arrangement view and then just click on the track that you want to be editing like that. So I'm changing the focus. And you can see the name of the track. This name right here, operator, and then this one is MIDI, because I didn't label them anything else. While I have these selected, I can also adjust the length of the loop. So if these are both have the loops turned on, I can adjust the length of the loops by playing around with these sliders up here. Both of them are showing up, so I can play around with the loop lengths. And then once I get into more of these things on the left, these type of different things that I can do to generate different note patterns, I can apply them across both of these clips. And do things like I could just split them all. Like I just hit the Command and E, just split both of these MIDI on both of the clips. So that's a cool thing, that now you can just apply all this processing to multiple clips at one time. So if I do want to duplicate this, you hit Command and D, duplicate that MIDI note. If I want this to just select a time, so I'm just going to click in here and that's going to select that time. Now it's going to duplicate the time. So this MIDI note is going to go over here because I'm duplicating the time. Same thing if I had a chord, duplicate that chord like that. Or if I just have this here, select the time essentially like that, and then duplicate the time like that. Now I have a chord there, and then there, and I can change the chord. B, D, F, that's a chord. Like that. Now let's get into some of the newer features that popped up in Ableton Live 12. So let's close this clip section. This launch is going to be for if you have like a launch pad or an external MIDI device. We're going to skip that. Let's go into the pitch and time. Let's just start with one note, and I have fit to scale. So let's say this note is a C sharp. That is not in the scale. I have the note selected. Boom. It's going to put it back at C. If I select these notes, now if I hover over this, it says invert notes, flips the selection upside down so that the highest note is swapped with the lowest note. If I hit this, nothing really happens. I don't know if that is a bug in Ableton Live 12 or if I'm just not doing it right, but let's go ahead and select these notes and hit invert. Nothing really happens. Let's put a note there. Let's put a note there. Let's see if anything happens if I select all these notes and see if anything happens. Okay, so something happened there. So something is happening. The notes are like switching. I'm not exactly sure how they figure out which notes to invert like that, but that is the invert. So we just have this C note. So let's go to this little box here. This is going to be scale degree. If I want to add an interval, I'm going to select the note. And if I want this to be 1 scale degree above, it's going to put at D. If I want it to be 2, it's going to be at E flat. So now I can play with those notes. So now if I select this note and I add an interval that is going to be 2 scale degrees above that, then it adds that interval, and you can just keep adding. Now we're distorting, but now I have like a chord. And so let's go ahead and delete that. I can select this note and multiply it. I can now divide it. I can stretch it like this using this slider. I can select a time, and then I can do fit to time range that I selected and then set that to the time length I want it to be. I can also humanize it, so I could change this timing, and then I can adjust it using this slider. I could also say I want it to be 1, I want it to be 1/8, and manually adjust the time. And let's say I have a chord like that, then you can select them all and then change the length. So let's say I want this to be 1/4. Then I change the note length. So I'm just using one note for an example, just to keep it simple. There's also this thing down here called reverse. And that means, so I'm going to select this time range. Let's do this. It's going to put this first note at the end like that. It's going to reverse it. So if I had a pattern that was like this, going up like that, select that, reverse it, it's going to reverse it like that. So that's a cool way to just reverse your patterns. Legato is going to set it to the length of my clip, boom, like that. It's now the clip length, or to the time length. So if I select this, let's say I have a C, if I select this, legato, it's going to take it out to the length of my time selection. Now that is everything for the pitch and time. So now let's get into the transform. I will open this up. The first one is arpeggiate. Let's say I have a C, E, and G, and I'm sliding this back and forth. So that it doesn't slide, I'm going to select this again, hit Option, hit Shift, and now it should snap. And if you have this transform turned on, then it's going to automatically change, like when I change the rate there. If you do this type of stuff, like you're playing around with your note with any of these transform stuff, make sure you do make a copy of your MIDI clip if you don't want it to be messed up, because it will just start messing up your MIDI clip. And if you want to save your original MIDI clip, just go ahead and make a copy of it, because it's hard to get it back unless you just hit like Command and Z. So let me go ahead and undo this. I'm going to select all these notes, unselect that. Let's go ahead and do 1/8. Let's do 2 standard deviations, and we'll hit Apply. And there's my arpeggio. Let's say I have this going across the whole length, and let's do the rate 1/16. Select my notes, boom. So there you have another way of doing arpeggiate instead of doing it in the past, where I think you would have to use like the MIDI device. This actually applies it to your MIDI notes. So it's kind of like destructive, I guess, unless you hit Command and Z where you can get it back. And you have all the same thing, like your styles, and you can play around with the steps that you want it to be arpeggiated. So now let's get into the connect. If I put in a note here, and there, and there, and there, and my grid is 1/16, this rate is like the minimum rate where it'll start connecting the notes. So if I put 1/16, then it's going to connect these notes because they're 1/16 notes. And let's go ahead and just do that. Now it connected the notes with little 1/16 notes. Let's go and undo that. These are 1/8 notes. I don't know why. These notes here are 1/8. So if I do 1/8, it's going to connect these with 1/8 notes, like that. If I do 1/4 though, it's not going to do anything because the minimum note length needs to be 1/4. It's not going to connect them because I have that rate at 1/4. So if I do 1/16, I can change the spread. It should put some notes in there that are kind of like spread out like that. So that's pretty cool. And it's just like connecting the empty spaces between all the notes. And then the density, you can control like how much it's going to connect everything, because maybe it will leave some of these spaces empty, like it left this empty there. And then this tie, let's go and see what this does. Put that at 100%. And so the tie, it says, determines the probability for note length or gap to be extended to the next one. So let's put this at 100% and try that again, see what it does, if it does anything. Not really sure what the tie does. It did something different there. Oh, so like if I have this at 0, then it's going to be a 1/16 note, but if I increase it, then it is more likely to be like a bigger note size. I guess that's what it does. So that is the connect. Let's go into ornament. Let's say I have a nice chord here. Maybe I'll make it 2 chord hits. We have a flam, so I can add like a little flam at the beginning of these chords. Let's go ahead and just transform it like that, and you can see it adds these little notes. This is good for like if you're creating a guitar sound or maybe like a strummed instrument. And now I'm creating another one. I can change the velocities. Then you have your grace notes, and like if you're playing trumpet, and let's go ahead and just zoom into the second one, it'll be easier to see. Sometimes you'll have like grace notes if you're playing a trumpet. Let me just have a single note, that might be easier to see. And let's go ahead and select this. Turn off the automatic transform. We can do a higher pitch like that, and it's creating 3 of them. So the amount there, I can change it to 1. Let's just only add 1 grace note like that. The chance that it happens. So if you have like a live performance and you're performing live, maybe you don't always want a grace note, I guess. You can lower the chance. The position, let's go -100 and apply this. It's all the way out there. Let's do -4 and apply it again and put it right there. Really small grace note, and I can do a lower note. So now I'm doing a lower note grace note. Then you have quantize, which we talked about earlier. There is this recombine. So if I have a C note here, I'm just putting in some random notes throughout the clip. Let's go ahead and select them. Now I can just play around with the pitch, length, and velocity. So if I go like this and hit apply, it's going to randomly change. Let's see if it changed all the velocities are the same. So if I change the velocity on this one and this one, maybe this one, and then it's going to start changing the velocities of different notes and changing the pitch and maybe also the length. So let's go ahead and make the length different on some of these. So let's go into, these are all 16th notes, and let's make a note there, change that velocity, maybe a note there. Okay, weird melody. And I can just kind of play around with this and now hit this apply, and this is just going to randomly switch up the pitch. So changing the note pitches, the length of notes, and also the velocity. So you can just kind of almost randomize everything. Or if you only want to change the pitch, I can just have the pitch selected. And now you can see the length and the velocity aren't changing, but the pitch is just moving up and down. Or I can just change the velocity around. And now you can see like the color is changing as the velocity changes, or the length. Now I can change it like that. Now we have the span. So if I have a note like this, I can do legato and I can make it bigger. So let's go ahead and transform that like that. And let's just turn on the transform as I'm doing this for this part. I can change that offset. I can add in some variation to legato. I don't really need to if I'm doing legato. So let's say I have this note, I can do tenuto. This is kind of like legato, I guess. See, I can offset the length of this note if I select this. And I think for legato, if I have legato on, if I select the time length, it should just transform it to the time length. Yeah, instead of the whole length across. And then I should be able to offset it. Yeah, so it's going to offset it again, like it just reset it to the whole length of the MIDI clip. And then you have staccato, where you can just shorten all your notes. So if you have really long notes, so staccato, if I just go ahead and transform this, if I hit this offset, it should just, maybe if I just do this, it should just shorten it really, yeah. Shorten it to my time selection. So let's say I have a length that is this and I want it to be that short. I can go like that if I have that staccato selected, and then play around with the offset and this variation. So the variation is going to, you can see I have 3 notes, and the variation is changing all the note lengths at the ends. And I guess that does that for all of these. So let's go ahead and try this with legato. That is my time selection. Play around with the offset and the variation. It's going to change up the variation of each of these notes so they're not all the same length. Next we have strum, which is really cool. Like if you are doing a guitar, creating a guitar sound. So with this strum, I can offset the start points of the notes and make a really nice strum sound. And let's add in another chord. So you can hear, instead of it just being like all the same timing, it's kind of like making it as if you're just strumming it, or like even if you're playing piano. So you can do, let's go ahead and select this first one, change the beginning points. You can also make them negative. So I can go to this one. You can see how I can adjust it like that. And also the starting point even more. And then also the tension is going to play around with the notes in the middle. If I have a note up here and I start playing around with this tension, it's going to start moving these notes in the middle. Also this time warp, let's say I have a note there. Just do eighth notes. That is the easiest way to see this. I can play around with the timing of the MIDI. So let's go and select all the notes, play around with the timing. It's not going to be in time though. I can also play around with the timing of the middle by just dragging these points, or also just selecting these numbers in the top and then dragging them back and forth. And I can just turn them all off. And if I do want it to be quantized, then I can just turn on the quantize. And then as I make these adjustments, the notes will snap to the grid. So if I do 1/16, it should snap at 1/16. So that's pretty interesting for that time warp. Then there are some Max for live devices. This velocity shaper is pretty interesting. So if I have all of these notes, they are all the same velocity. If I put on this velocity shaper, then it's going to change the first notes to be louder, then the last notes to be softer. I have the transform on, so you can see that it already transformed it, made these notes louder and these notes softer. You can have this little velocity shaper loop. So in my clip, it's going to do it twice. It's going to go up and down, essentially. So this one's louder, it goes quieter, louder, quieter, like that. And then it has this rotate, which I guess you can shift this. It's like an envelope, so I think you can like shift it across the grid. So you can play around with it being rotated, I guess. So let's do that. Select it all and rotate it. And so you can see I just shifted it over a bit. So now the starting point is on the second note. And you can change up the divisions. So that is everything for the transform. Let's go now into the generate. So you have rhythm. So if I just have this pattern, let's go 16th notes. And let's turn off this generate automatically, because I don't want to generate, but we can play around with the pattern, the density, the step duration. It's going to automatically put in some notes for me, which will be useful if you're doing like maybe drums and you want to add in some patterns. I can also change the velocity of the different notes. This split says it determines the chance that a step will be split into 2 equal length parts. Let's turn this on and just play around with adjusting it. So you can play with the pattern, the density. If I put at 100%, of course, it's going to be all the way across 100%. If I do 4 steps, it should, divide it into, what note is that? 1/16 notes. And let's go ahead and delete this. And I believe let's do shift, change this density. So now I can just shift these notes across the MIDI clip. And then this frequency down here, this will shift the position of, it says it shifts the position of accented notes in the pattern. So you can see that some of these velocities are being accented and some of these notes are not. So you can shift how they are accented. Next is this seed. So what seed does is if I hit this apply, it's going to apply a bunch of notes according to these parameters. So I can set the lowest pitch that I want a note to occur in, I can set the highest note. I can set the smallest duration I want a note to be and also the largest duration. And I can set the smallest velocity I want a note and then the highest velocity. And then I can just hit this apply and then it'll just kind of generate all these random note patterns. If I do one voice, then it's not going to stack notes on top of each other. But if I do 4, it'll stack notes on top of each other as I increase this voices. If I do 16, yeah, then it should stack them all. Pretty crazy. So that's cool to play around with. Maybe if you wanted to generate a lead melody, do something like this, and maybe you want 1/8 and 1/16 notes. Go like this, generate a lead melody. Maybe get some ideas. Then there is shape. So you can actually just draw like how you want the shape of notes, these notes to look like, and then change the rate so I could have it be the grid. My grid is 1/16. This tie again, I can raise this up. Determines the probability for note length or gap to be extended to the next one. Maybe I put this at 50%. And then this is jitter. So this sets the amount of random variation that is applied to original note pitches. Let's go ahead and hit that and see what it comes up with. And it created a pattern according to my shape. Let's say I wanted to start low and go high. And then we see the notes going up like that. And then they have some patterns of their own. So let's do this arc down one. So let's move on to the stacks. Now this is cool because it allows you to generate chords. Now I'm going to empty that out and let's do a root at C because we are doing C minor. And we'll select this shape, hit this apply. And if you hover over this, you can see down at the bottom here what it says, what chord it is. So you can say it says it's going to be a C minor with the scale degrees at 1, 3, and 5. So here's the 1, here's the 3, and here's the 5. Let's increase this velocity. Pretty quiet. If I scroll up, then you can see it changes. If you look at that, our little info panel, it says 1, 3, and 6, a C minor sharp 5, C minor 7, C minor 9, C sus4. So you can have all these awesome chord shapes. Let's start with just the basic one. We'll leave it at the C minor. If I want to create a pattern, then I can add in another chord. Let's say I want to change this root note. So let's make the root note maybe a G and generate. So now it's going to automatically split my clips like that. I can also change the duration by adjusting the duration. Let's say this one is going to be 1/4. And to reset this duration, I just hit delete and reset to 1. Now I can add another chord, and maybe I want to invert the chord. So let's do a D sharp with an inversion. So this now has a D sharp. It says E flat here, but I wonder if I can change this to say not a sharp, but so E flat is up there. If I take that inversion off, then it is not inverted, so the E flat goes down. I want 4 chords though, so let's go and add on another 4th one. Maybe invert this one and hit apply. If you want to see this in real time happening, you can activate the generate, and maybe I change the inversion like that. Maybe, so I'm just playing around with like the note shapes. I find this generate the stacks, the coolest way to generate like chord patterns. I like this one a lot. I can also offset these chords a tiny bit by hitting this offset. And because I have all the chords selected, it's going to offset all of them. I could just select one chord at a time and offset it or change the duration like this. Now there are some Macs for Live devices already loaded up in here. So this Euclidean one, let me go ahead and delete this and hit generate. It's going to generate just some random patterns of notes according to this circle thing. And I can just play around with this, turn this one off. I mean, this is just like almost like a randomization pattern thing. So I can change the density like this, or lower it, change the steps. So let's do 1/8, maybe. Change the divisions. Let's do 1/8. And maybe do the steps, increase the steps. So you can just play around with all the notes in here, and then you can change the pitches of the voices. So, and the velocities. Like that. So you can play around with some cool things in this Euclidean generate thing. Those are all super low. Maybe I'd make them a lot higher. Now I believe that that is everything that is new in the Ableton Live 12 update. I think that these new creative ways to generate ideas in the clip section are pretty cool, like generate and transform have some really cool features that did not exist in Ableton Live 11. So I'm excited about playing around with them a bit more. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and give it a like, and also please subscribe to my channel if you are not yet subscribed. And if you'd like to check out any of my streamer preset packs, head on over to store.samsmyers.com.